Good evening, everyone. Another journey through this week's portion and Parsha. We'll go through the summary of what is presented this week and then take some life messages that we are able to apply as well. Welcome, everyone who's just joined. We'll begin with a summary, as we always do. What happens this week? Yitzchak and Rivka were praying for children after 22 years of marriage. Rivka becomes pregnant. Wonderful. Rivka was advised by Hashem that her exceedingly difficult pregnancy was due to the fact that she had two children, twins, two nations that were actually struggling in her womb. We'll come back to that point. So she gives birth to the twin boys, very different in every way. The one is hairy, ruddy, and he is named Esau. And the second son, who was born clutching on his brother's heel, Yaakov means, Akev means a heel. So Esau comes from the word Asa, is already done. He was already had physical features that made him look like, in many ways, an adult, ready-made. And Yaakov seemingly is the heel holder, holding onto Esau's heel. Esau becomes a hunter, so it's not only their complexion and the way they look, but their whole approach to life. Esau is an outdoor person who loves to hunt. Yaakov is an honest man who lives and frequents the schools of Torah. Yitzchak favors Esau. We're going to need to understand why. While Rivka prefers Yaakov. Then it happened that a hungry Esau pleads with Yaakov to please give him some of the stew he was cooking. Why were they cooking? We'll learn about that too. And Yaakov agrees. But he makes a provision on condition that Esau gives him his birthright as firstborn in exchange. Esau had the birthright because he was the first of the twins to emerge from the womb. So he was the firstborn. Yaakov says, I'll give you food, but you give me what is not so really valuable to you. I'll give you what's not so valuable to me, that you're chalishing for some good soup. So you'll exchange your rights as the firstborn for soup, and Esau is ready to do so. Then Yitzchak escapes the famine in Canaan by traveling all the way to Egypt via Plishtim. Philistines lived more or less where Gaza is today, so he traveled past them all the way to Egypt. Hashem told him to remain in Plishtim and that he would receive all the blessings he had promised to Abraham, so he doesn't actually go down to Egypt. When the Philistines inquired regarding his wife, they didn't just inquire regarding his wife. Every time, either Egyptians, in this case the Philistines, as soon as they saw a beautiful woman, they felt entitled. So he told them that she was his sister, fearing that otherwise the Plishtim would kill him, Yitzchak, in order to take Rivka. Exact replay of what happened with Sarah and Abraham when they came to Egypt. So if you were the wife, you would immediately get, if it was a husband, he would get killed so that he was out of the way. Then they could do whatever they wanted with this woman. If he was a brother, then he had certain responsibilities, and that's why he said, I'm a brother. Abimelech, the king of Plishtim, noticed that Rivka was Yitzchak's wife, in fact. He reprimands Yitzchak. You see, you know who's holier than thou, who starts preaching righteousness. The Abimelech starts saying, well, you should have told me that this is your wife, not your sister. And you almost brought failure to my palace, to all the people of my palace, because we would have then taken a married woman. He has no qualms about the fact that he was taking a woman, or he wanted to, by force against her will. But he holds the moral high ground, and he preaches to Yitzchak that he was the one that was deficient, that he didn't tell him the whole story, notwithstanding that Yitzchak only did that because he knew the evil intentions of Abimelech, which Abimelech does not own. He tells nobody in his court to even touch in any way, Rivka or Yitzchak. Now, Yitzchak sows a whole lot of crops in the area of Plishtim, and he miraculously harvests 100 times more than the field's normal yield. He was very into tzedakah, into charity, and his field, as a result, was able to yield much more. Then there's a whole discussion about the wells. Yitzchak redug some of Abraham's wells that were stopped up by the Plishtim. So we have this interplay where the Plishtim have an objective to fill and to stop up any of the wells that were dug by Abraham and then now by Yitzchak. There's a whole lot of conflict about the wells. And Yitzchak redigs the wells. So Yitzchak clearly was the well digger. And we're going to try and understand what that means. The envious Plishtim asked Yitzchak to leave. He settles in the Grar Valley. The Plishtim contested his ownership over the wells that he's dug. So again, there's a whole lot of contention about the wells. The wells seem to be important. And the third well he dug was uncontested. And the names of the wells are presented. Then Hashem appears to Yitzchak and he blesses him and he assures him that he will always be with him. Abimelech and Yitzchak enter into a peace treaty. Yitzchak's servants dug another well. The wells is such a obvious, important theme that we need to understand. What's the relationship between Yitzchak and well digging? At the age of 40, Esau marries two wives. Their idolatrous ways anguish Yitzchak and Rivka. Yitzchak, who is now blind, tells Esau, the son, the older son whom he prefers, to go and hunt food for him, and then he would bless him. So the all-important blessings would be bestowed upon Esau, the older son, the wild son, because he would bring him food from the hunt. Very strange that that's the method by which he would earn his entitlement to the blessing. Rivka sees all of this happening. She advises Yaakov to don Esau's clothing and to trick his father Yitzchak into believing that he was really Esau when he was Yaakov, and he would bless him instead of Esau. So he would trick the father into giving him the blessings. Rivka prepared meat and took hairy goat skin and put it on Yaakov's smooth arms and neck, because remember, Esau was a very hairy individual. So as soon as the father would touch Yaakov, he'd immediately know that it's not Esau. So she put this hairy goat skin on, and she prepared meat so that he would have it immediately and he wouldn't have to waste time and be delayed by having to hunt for it. Yaakov presents himself as Esau to Yitzchak, who ate from the repast that Rivka had prepared. Yitzchak blesses Yaakov with the dew of the heaven, mital hashamayim mishmanei haaretz, and from the fat of the earth, and he granted him mastery over his brother. So the father, Yitzchak, says, you, my son, thinking he's Esau, will have mastery over your brother. But in fact, he was giving it to the wrong brother, or the right brother, but not the one that he thought he was giving it to. Esau arrives from the field, finally got food from the hunt, and only to be informed by his father, who now understood what really transpired, that the blessing was already given to his younger brother. Now Esau was very upset. Esau was furious, and Yitzchak comforts him with a minor blessing by comparison. Esau was determined to kill Yaakov. Also important to add that Yitzchak, once he finds out which son is in fact in front of him, that he'd given the blessings to the younger son, Yaakov, the one that his wife Rivka preferred and loved more. And when he discovers that in fact he'd given the blessing to the son that he didn't think he was giving it to, he says the words, Gam Baruch Yiyeh. I now understand what has transpired, but I endorse and I reaffirm the blessing that I gave to the son, who wasn't the son that I was intending to give it to, but now I've agreed. I agree with my wife, may he have the blessing. So in the end, he comes round to accept that Yaakov was in fact the one who deserved and would be the better carrier of the blessing into the future of his progeny. Rivka asked Yitzchak to send Yaakov to Haran to find a wife. Isaac does so and blesses Yaakov again. Yitzchak sent Yaakov to his brother-in-law Lavan's home to marry one of his daughters. He goes to the same home, the same place where Avram had sent his servant Eliezer to find a wife for Yitzchak. Yitzchak is now sending Yaakov to find a wife, the next generation, but to the same pool, to the same place that he would find a wife from the same place that he had found a wife. Esau, this is like another point completely. Esau marries again. this time to Machlat, the daughter of Yishmael. So obviously there was a lot of inbreeding and family members at that point in the world. Let's go through some of the messages we can take from all of the events that transpired this week. The first verse begins by saying, Ele Toldot, and the name of this week's portion is Toldot, which means generations. These are the generations of Abraham. Abraham olidet Yitzchak. Abraham fathered Yitzchak. The obvious question on this verse is, Isaac is the son of Abraham. Abraham fathered Yitzchak. Well, obviously, if Yitzchak was the son of Abraham, then Abraham fathered Yitzchak. Why would it repeat the same piece of information a second time? There are many commentaries. Rashi quotes the verse, the commentary, that Hashem formed that the countenance of Yitzchak would be exactly the same and would resemble that of Abraham. So that all the cynics might attest that Abraham had fathered Yitzchak. Well, you know that Abraham had lived many years until he was able to have a son. So the concern when people saw that suddenly Sarah was pregnant, they said, well, who's the father? Can't be Abraham. They've been living together for so many years. And remember, Sarah was captured by Paro. And maybe, and also the journeys that she went through. So maybe Yitzchak is not the son of Abraham. Maybe he's the son of another person. So Abraham and Yitzchak's faces resembled each other so perfectly that anybody who looked at them knew right away that Abraham fathered Yitzchak. So that's the repetition according to Rashi. We want to tell the generations of Yitzchak, the son of Abraham. And by the way, Hashem made a miracle to make it look so clearly that Abraham fathered Yitzchak, so no cynics could cast any aspersions as to the legitimacy of Yitzchak being the child of Abraham. The second opinion. Why would it say Yitzchak, the son of Abraham? Abraham fathered Yitzchak. So this commentary from the Midrash says, well, sometimes parents take delight in talking about their wonderful children. Sometimes children talk about the exceptional parents and grandparents that they had. Remember, my father was a frum Jew, and he was a rabbi, and he was learned, and he knew a lot of Torah. So often children speak about parents in a very positive way. Parents talk about children, but not so often do you have it working both ways. That the father who takes delight in the roadmap that the child is taking, and that the child at the same time takes pride in his father. And that's what the verse was emphasizing. These are the generations of Isaac, the son of Abraham. Isaac was delighted to be known as the son of Abraham. Abraham fathered Yitzchak because Abraham was delighted to be known as the father of Yitzchak. Wouldn't it be beautiful if when we talk about how wonderful our parents were, that we would know that they would say the same thing. Look how wonderful my children are. Sometimes we're more proud of our parents than our parents are proud of us. So this verse is telling us that it went both ways. Isaac took pride in his father, and his father Abraham took pride in him. And finally, on a more esoteric level, according to the teachings of Chassidut, Abraham represented a certain track in terms of human emotions and faculties of soul. Abraham represented the characteristic of chesed, of kindness, abundant giving. By contrast, Yitzchak was associated and had the particularly strong characteristic of discipline, of structure, of boundaries. They were very different personalities. Abraham is the one who's constantly gushing with giving, and Yitzchak is much more contained. And it had many, many manifestations. We'll continue to talk on this theme tonight. For example, Abraham went through many countries. He came all the way from Mesopotamia, goes to Israel, goes to Egypt, he comes back to Israel. Yitzchak was much, much more contained. He always was in Israel. And adjacent to Israel, still part of its domain, the land of Plishtim, but he never went to Egypt. His whole life was much more holy, much more surrounded by holy elements. He was like the perfect human being who was only surrounded by perfection. Abraham engaged, encountered. He went out. He was representing Chesed, which is giving, and Yitzchak represented the boundaries. So they were very different in their approach, in their attitude, in their characteristics of soul. And this verse is coming to say, nevertheless, as different as they were in their personalities, in the way they ticked, as different as they were so similar in terms of goals, in terms of purpose, in terms of what I want to achieve in this world. And therefore, even these diverse contributions that we're making to the world were part of an identical mission, which was to bring godliness to the world. These are the generations of Isaac, the son of Abraham. Abraham fathered Isaac. They were alike and equal. They were so much the same, even though in terms of personality and characteristics of soul, they were very different personalities. These are all different interpretations. Wide would say Isaac, the son of Abraham. Abraham fathered Isaac, a repetition that seems to be redundant. And the children struggled within her. She's having a very difficult pregnancy, and she goes to get advice as to what she can do to just relieve the pain and the anguish that she's going through. And it turned out like this, the Midrash says, that whenever she would pass a house of prayer or a house of study, so the one child, Jacob, would struggle to come out because this is the domain that he wants to be part of. Whenever she passed a house of idol worship, negative elements, Esau would try and struggle to come out. So there was the constant struggle between these two children in the womb because they had different worldviews and different destinies. They were different human beings completely, not only in their characteristics, but in their purpose. Very different to the differences between Yitzchak and Abraham. So also they were struggling between themselves, fighting over the inheritance of the two worlds. So even in the womb, they were already conflicted about assets, purpose, blessings, goals. Was it the material world or was it the world to come? They were very, very different human beings. Rebecca was comforted. Why would she be comforted if she now knows that she has two children in her womb? Because she thought whenever she went past something of holiness, the child would want to come out, and the same child was now wanting to come out at a different time, that she had a schizophrenic child in her womb who didn't know what he really wanted. He was all over the place. So when it was told to her by the wise of that generation that in fact they're two different children and therefore two different purposes and two different goals, she found comfort in that, because at least it wasn't one individual who was completely had conflicts internally, but in fact there were two children. So there would be different destinies for her children. And then the verse says, the one nation will constantly struggle against the other. Rashi quotes that they will never be equal. It's like a seesaw. When the one rises, the other will fall, and the other way around. When the Jewish people aspire to their spiritual status and they become so connected to the above, the enemies become weaker. When we become weakened in our Judaism and being attached to our identity and purpose, we become weakened, immediately the enemy becomes stronger. It's a seesaw. It's not two at the top. It's always one is at the top and one is at the bottom. We've got to choose where we want to put ourselves. Now, Yitzchak loves Esau, and superficially, Rashi quotes the Midrash, Itzayid befor, because the game, the hunt, was in his mouth. So literally, he loved him because he ate the food of the hunt. But Rashi quotes the Midrash that says, the hunt was in his mouth, meaning that he hunted with his mouth. He misrepresented himself. He tried to portray a holiness and a dedication to important things, which was not representing who he really was. So the Midrash tells us that Esau would deceive his father with his mouth. Tzayid befor then would mean not that the food that he hunted was in his mouth, but that he hunted with his mouth. He used his mouth to capture his father's adulation and in a way that was not really earned. He would ask his father different questions. And the Midrash actually says what questions he asked. Father, how do you take the tithe, the maaser, the charity that one has to give, a tithe of all one's produce? How do you take the tithe of salt? And how do you take the tithe of straw, says the Midrash. Now, both salt and straw, salt doesn't have to have a tithe taken from it. We don't have the salt tax that was imposed in other places. So the salt is a mineral. And the tithe that had to be given was from the food that grew from the ground. So salt doesn't have to be tithed. Animal fodder is not fit for human consumption, so it also doesn't have to be tithed. But Esau would come to his father and he'd say, how does one take tithe of the things that really you didn't have to take tithe? Implying how holy and religious and committed to the law he was, that he was going way beyond the requirement. He was wanting to do much more. And Isaac would muse and say, this son of mine, how diligent he is in the fulfillment of the commandments. But all he was really was hunting his father. He was misrepresenting himself to his father and portraying an image that captured his father's love for him, which went actually against the grain. It was not what he truly was. On a deeper level, why does the Midrash specifically talk about salt and straw? Salt represents the Torah. Very briefly, why would salt represent the Torah? Because salt has different capacities physically that represent what Torah does for our lives. Salt, for example, adds taste, and Torah adds taste and meaning to our lives. Salt has the capacity of separating issues. The reason why we use salt to kasher meat is because salt will absorb the blood out of the meat. It separates what is not good from that which is good. And the Torah gives us the ability to separate the things that are appropriate from the things that are not appropriate. And finally, salt has the ability to preserve. Before the age of refrigeration, people would salt their food in order to preserve it. And Torah preserves the meaning of life. It takes a finite moment and gives it an infinity. So salt represents the Torah on many different levels. Coming to tithe the salt on a deeper level represents wanting to manipulate the Torah by wanting to supposedly make it even better, to perfect the Torah beyond what Hashem has given us. And the answer is, you don't tithe the salt. You don't have to perfect Torah. Torah is perfect. And Hashem has given us exactly what he wants us to do. We don't tithe salt. But according to this deep understanding, Esau was implying, how can we manipulate the Torah to make it seem even better than what God was intending? And on the other end of the spectrum, straw. Straw doesn't have to be tithed because it's animal fodder. It's too low an item to be able to become fit for human consumption just because you took the tithe. You cannot manipulate that which belongs for the animal kingdom. That which is animalistic cannot be presented in a way that it looks as though it's kosher. So don't touch the salt because Torah is perfect. It doesn't need you to perfect it. And don't come to try and portray that which belongs to the animal can be perfected somehow and then can become part of human consumption. What belongs to animal belongs to animal. Don't aspire or want to desire to acquire that which is animalistic. Recognize that that's not part of your world. So moving on, Jacob was cooking a stew. Why would the Torah take the time to tell us that they were cooking? And why was he cooking at that time? Says the Midrash and the Gemara that this was the day in which Abraham had died. And Yaakov made a broth of lentils, adashim in the Torah, to comfort his father, a mourner's meal. So Yaakov was cooking a soup with lentils to serve lentils to his father because his father had now gone into mourning for the loss of his father Abraham. Why lentils? Just as lentils has no mouth. It's completely round. It's smooth on all sides. No place that you have an edge. So the mourner does not have a mouth. A mourner is speechless. And just as the lentil is round, so morning comes around to all the inhabitants of this world. There's a cycle of life. And things go around. And even when we're sad and bereaved, we have to know that it turns. And life is a cyclic. It's not a number line, that it begins here and it ends there, and you fall off the cliff at the end of life. It's cyclic. There are worlds and journeys of soul, and everything in this life turns. And this is the biblical origin of the custom that when mourners come back from the cemetery, they eat something that's round. The mourner's meal that we normally give to mourners when they come back from the cemetery is either bagels, which are round, or eggs, which are round, or lentils, which are round, or anything that is round and smooth. And the origin for that biblically is this story where we're told that Yaakov was cooking, and then Esau came to get some soup from his brother. Why was he cooking, and why did the Torah tell us? The need to tell us, was it so important to know that he was cooking and why he was cooking? Hashem appears. Yitzchak is on his way to Egypt, remember? And Hashem appears to him and he said, no, don't go down to Egypt. Dwell in this land. Hashem said to him, you are like a burnt offering without blemish. As a burnt offering becomes unfit if it passes beyond the temple enclosure, so you will become unfit if you go out of the holy land of Israel. You are perfection personified, Yitzchak. You represent all the boundaries that contain holiness. Your father, he was chesed. He was a different characteristic of the soul. And he lived for giving and for sharing, and that was the process of visiting as many places to impact in the vastest area that he could go. You are about containment, about boundaries, about making sure that we preserve the holiness. And that's why Yitzchak never left Israel, and he had a different role to Abraham, which was outreach, going out and impacting on the world in the broader sense. Re-emphasizing our first point that we made tonight, but one of the commentaries explains, why does it say Isaac, the son of Abraham? Abraham was the father of Isaac, because although they were so different and had different lives and different ways they conducted their lives, they were so similar and exactly the same in their purpose and their goal, which was to bring holiness to the world. Different approaches, same purpose. And this ties up with the fact that Isaac dug wells. Again, the wells of water, and he called it by the names that he called them, and the same names that his father called them, and he dug the wells. What's the symbolism of wells? We spoke about it last week, but a different insight into wells and why Yitzchak was the one who was constantly digging wells. Well, there's two ways of bringing water to somebody who's thirsty. One approach is to pipe water from where there's lots of water to a place where the person is thirsty and he's parched and the earth is parched. So you bring water there, you convey the water there. A person's thirsty, bring him a bottle of water and you give him water to drink. Avram did that. Avram, who was the symbol of chesed, of kindness, he was constantly quenching the thirst of everybody by bringing them water. If you're thirsty, I'll bring you water. I'll teach you. I will feed you. I will make sure that you have all your needs. Physically, spiritually, I will give it to you. I will just simply make sure that you have all your needs taken care of. Remember we said Yitzchak? Yitzchak wasn't about the abundant gushing of chesed. Yitzchak, by contrast, was containment, discipline, structure. And therefore his method of bringing water to an individual was to say, dig the well. We're not going to convey water to you automatically that you now suddenly have all the blessings you need. Dig deeper. Water is actually here. You don't need water from somewhere else. If you take the effort and you dig deeper, you will find the water within. The well represents the finding of the wealth that is within us, within society, within the opportunity. So rather than constantly conveying and gifting and bringing all the things that are required from the outside, Yitzchak was demanding. He said, the water source is the well. Let's dig for it. And the Plishtim, the Philistines, constantly stopped up the wells and he redug them. It was this process of wanting to realize the strength that lies within. It's been often said that if you want to feed somebody who's hungry, you can give him a fish. But if you want to teach him how to live the rest of his life and not be hungry, teach him how to fish. Don't just give him the fish, teach him how, because the well represents being able to find the source within. Now, it's actually very interesting. I mentioned the other day, and unfortunately in a very sad context of a funeral. What's interesting is that whose name is called Yitzchak? Yitzchak is the son of Abraham, who is associated with strictness, with structure, with demands, with boundaries. Abraham, who's the chesed individual, who's giving, constantly giving. So you would imagine who it should be more associated with the word Yitzchak, which means to laugh. Where would one imagine the true source of laughter? You would imagine that laughter comes from abundance, from a gushing, from giving, from sharing, from being boundless, no boundaries. So you laugh. But Yitzchak is the serious one. He's the structured one. He's the disciplined one. And his name is Yitzchak, to laugh. Why is laughter seemingly associated with the personality traits and characteristics that are supposedly not? They're serious. They're not to do with laughter. So in trying to understand these themes, it's not like Abraham is good and God forbid Yitzchak is bad. Both of them are necessary processes. And the image that if you can kind of conjure in your mind is the difference between a waterfall, Niagara Falls, and a tap. Well, Niagara Falls has a lot more water, and it's gorgeous and it's beautiful and it's gushing and it's giving the whole time. But if you want to drink, you're better off with the faucet. Why? Because when you channel the energy, when you give it context and structure and you create the canal, then although you're limiting the force, you're creating opportunity for it to be digested and absorbed and used much more practically than when it's gushing over the side of the Niagara Falls. So it's not like Yitzchak's against giving. He's giving in a deeper way. He's saying, I don't want to just constantly give and give and give, and then you will become dependent on my giving. I want you to become self-sufficient. I want you to... So Yitzchak, the joy of Yitzchak is the culmination of Abraham and Yitzchak. True, if you create a tap and there's no water, it's meaningless. But if you have this gushing of water without the channeling of it through a tap, then that doesn't have the joy of life either. So Yitzchak is not, in a sense, against what his father accomplished. He's building on it, and he's extending it. He's saying, yes, chesed is wonderful, but you also have to channel it. And the true laughter, the joy of life, comes from the combination, from the ability to have the water gushing, but then channeled into a productive purpose. Why did Yitzchak become blind? Why did his eyes become dimmed? So Rashi quotes that it's from the smoke of the offerings that Esau's wives burnt for their idols. So idolatry was in the air, and that caused his eyes to go dim. Secondly, when Isaac was bound on the altar and the angels wept, their tears fell into his eyes, whatever that means symbolically, because angels don't have eyes and tears. This came to pass in order to enable Yaakov to receive the blessing. So the very simple meaning is, he needed to be blind because of the episode that is about to unfold. And let's go right to it. What was the episode unfolding? Well, Esau and Yitzchak and Jacob, Esau and Yaakov, Esau and Jacob were very different. Esau was the brother, is hairy, and I'm a smooth man. So when his mother is suggesting that he should impersonate his brother Esau, the obvious question would be like, look how different we are. Esau, as we said, he was impetuous, impatient, quick fix. Esau means ready-made, it's done. He arrived ready-made, fast foods. Yaakov, by contrast, is perseverance and committed to the long haul. They were very different. But let's try and get into this debate between Rivka and Yitzchak. So what we know is that Rivka loved Yaakov, Yitzchak loved Esau, and that in itself seems to be a very strange insight into marriage, a marriage of our forefathers. Yitzchak and Rivka, a married couple, taking preferences, I like this child, I like that child. Was it that superficial? Now let's go into the actual episode. Yitzchak says, I want to give you my blessings. What should you do to earn my best blessings? Go hunt. So the hunt will then entitle you to these spiritual blessings that are the future of Am Yisrael, our people Israel. What's going to achieve that? You go and hunt an animal and you bring me food to eat. When I eat the food, then I'll be able to, when I'm blessed with the indulgence of a good meal, then I'll give you the blessings that you require. What was Yitzchak thinking that hunting has anything to do with getting blessings? And furthermore, what was Rivka doing in saying to her son, let's deceive your father, I'm going to deceive my husband? Wouldn't a good marriage have had a preferable way for this couple to talk this through? Wouldn't a marriage counselor get involved and say, well, you have these different dreams and different goals. Don't use the child to go against the father. Talk about it. Let's discuss it. Let's bring it to the table and talk about what our different thoughts are and come to an understanding. This whole episode implies that Rivka and Yitzchak are on different planets, different attitudes, and a whole charade of dressing up and pretending you're Esau and then you'll steal the blessings. This whole story needs profound insight to understand what the Torah is telling us this week. And it's at the heart of this week's parsha. So we must say that we're talking about fathers of our people Israel. Yitzchak and Rivka had an ideal marriage. They were talking, they were discussing, and they were arguing about different concepts and approaches to achieve the blessings of the future of the progeny, their progeny, Am Yisrael, our people Israel. And they had different worldviews, different methods of wanting to achieve the blessing. Esau on the one hand said Yitzchak on the one hand said, my son Esau is strong, he's powerful, he has a capacity to deal with the world outside. When anti-Semitism is rife, which unfortunately it is in the world, then who's going to be able to defend the Jewish people? You're going to need an Esau, a person who knows how to bear arms and take on the world. The only thing is that Esau doesn't have that sensitivity and the holiness. So let's take the foundation of Esau and bring into him the sensitivity of purpose, of Torah, of values. That is how blessings are going to be sustained. Take an Esau and introduce to him inner purpose and meaning. Because ultimately, you must say, Yitzchak, he was blind at the end of his life, he didn't see who his children were. He must have known that Esau was the hunter and Yaakov was sitting and learning in the tents. And what did he ultimately want? Even Yitzchak, Isaac, he wanted a world that was going to be impacted on by spiritual values. The obvious candidate for that was Jacob. Are we saying that Isaac, even when he could see, didn't notice who his son was, that he was busy tricking him with all of these questions about tithing salt and tithing animal fodder, and that way he hunted his father, and his father was so naive that he didn't know who his son was? We must say that he definitely knew who Esau was. He saw him as a wild individual, a powerful individual, a physical individual, somebody who could hold a spear in his hand. And he said, if these blessings are going to endure centuries of hatred, of war, of difficulty, it needs the power of Esau. It's just that we obviously know that Esau cannot do it unless he has a spiritual purpose, a means of using his force for something godly, for something good. And Rivka would argue with her husband and say, no, my husband, that's the other way around. The foundation has to be holiness. The foundation has to be spiritual. The essence has to be in the tents of learning. And then, in order to be able to sustain themselves in a difficult world with so many enemies, Jacob is going to have to learn how to hold a gun too. But the definition of the worthiness of blessings, the essence has to be holy, and superimpose on the holiness the method and the ability to deal with a deviant and devious and evil world. They had two opinions. They did discuss it. This was being discussed at their supper table every night, probably. Rivka was saying the essence has to be holiness, and then you impose onto that holiness, you introduce the elements of strength. And Yitzchak saying, no, the essence has to be strength, and you superimpose onto the strength the tenets of spiritual purpose and meaning. And then eventually the showdown happened. And Yitzchak wants to demonstrate to his wife what I'm talking about. That Esau, if directed, if he utilizes his strength for something productive, if the energy of Esau is used for a purpose that is meaningful, then you will see that Esau is the worthy one to receive the blessing. We just have to introduce purpose and meaning to the wild nature of Esau. And therefore Yitzchak introduces the hunt. Because until now, Esau went out hunting every single day. Why did he hunt animals? For sport, because he enjoyed killing animals. So Yitzchak is saying, my son Esau, go out into the field and use your wild ability to take on the animals of the field and to kill, but do it for a purpose. Do it to serve meaning. Do it to bring food to your father and assist your father in Kibbud Av, and you will taste what it means to use your strength for something that is productive, to feed, to assist, to help. So this was now a demonstration of a worldview that he had all the years in his discussion with his wife. That you need to just introduce to Esau purpose and meaning, and suddenly he will be the worthy one to receive the blessing. And Rivka, so wise, she has to demonstrate to her husband the reverse. That the essence has to be a Jacob, where the voice is the voice of Yaakov, who learns Torah, who's totally associated with only good things and spiritual strength. But when you're worried that he's weak and he's not going to be able to contend with a world out there that hates and wants to destroy, he'll put on the covering. He will assume a facade of the hunter, and he'll be able to endure a world that hates him. Don't put on the veneer of holiness onto the essence, which is wild. Rather put the veneer of the wild field onto the essence that is holy. They were talking about this all along, and suddenly they were demonstrating it to one another. And as a good husband should know to do when his wife is right, when he finally realizes that Yaakov was strong enough to trick even an Esau, that he could take on Esau in his world, that he is able to hold the military weapon when the time comes. He turns to his wife and he says, Gam Baruch Yihiyeh, so he shall be blessed. You were right, my wife. I was worried that Yaakov's not going to be able to contend with the world of Esau. He's outsmarted him, even in his world. And look, he has the essence of holiness. So that's how we understand such a charade of themes that seem to have nothing to do with purpose. It was actually the demonstration of their worldview. Is it the Esau who assumes purpose that gets the blessing, or is the Yaakov that dresses up as an Esau who's worthy to get the blessing? Because he thereby demonstrates that he can take on the world when he needs to. And look at our beautiful young men and women in Israel, and Israel which is only desiring peace and only desiring to live in a world that is blessed. But when we need to take on weapons in order to defend ourselves, we do that. That doesn't define us. That's not who we want to be. That's not the essence of who we are. We want to be creative. We want to bring the world physical and spiritual gifts, which Israel is doing all the time. But don't mess with us. If you think you're going to push us over, we know how to deal with you at your world and utilize what you have as weaponry against a world that is so relentless in wanting to destroy us. How's that for an approach to understanding a view of Yitzchak and a view of Rivka looking at the son Yitzchak as a hunter with a purpose, and looking at Yaakov, who is a person who learns Torah in the tents, but if he needs to, he can put on the facade of being an Esau. That brings us through till 8 o'clock. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining. Have a beautiful, beautiful Shabbos and a beautiful week that lies ahead. May we only be filled with blessing. Have a beautiful Shabbos. God bless.